Hello, I'm Jen Long and you are listening to Talk the Line. We upload a new episode every Friday talking to an artist about something that they are passionate about, their secret hobby, the thing they talk about in the pubs to their friends and never tell us journalists until we've switched the microphone off and started walking out the building. It's those little things that really get them fired up. That is what this podcast is about. You can check out all our previous episodes at talktheline.blog, including the likes of Max Richter on Haruki Murakami, Kate Nash on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Stuart Murdoch on the human condition. We have covered quite a lot of subjects, quite a broad range of subjects too. You can follow us on social media at Talk the Line. You can follow me at Jen Long. And if you do like this podcast and you listen every now and then, please subscribe. It means it gets downloaded to your listening device every single Friday. Neko Case was raised in working-class Washington state and spent her turbulent childhood shuffling between divorced parents before leaving home at 15. By 17, she was playing drums, and at 23, she moved to Vancouver to study art, where she played in local punk bands and began to explore country music. She released her debut album, The Virginian, in 1997, and 9 more solo albums have followed, with her latest, Hell On, out this month. It's co-produced by Björn Yttling from Bjorn and John and includes collaborations with the likes of Beth Ditto, Laure Veiers, Katie Lang, Robert Forster and New Pornographers co-founder Carl Newman. The record was born in a literal fire. Neko Case was in the middle of recording in Stockholm when she got a 3 a.m. phone call telling her that her house back in Vermont was burning down and she's likely to lose everything. In this podcast, we are talking about the Amazons, not the indie rock band from Reading. This is a book by Adrienne Maor called The Lives and Legends of Warrior Women Across the Ancient World. However, we start our conversation talking about raisins.
They're delicious and I want them, but
I
they don't
prefer
want
sultana.
me. They don't want me.
What's the difference between a raisin and a sultana?
Sultanas are dates, aren't they? Yeah.
Then what are dried dates? What are dried dates? Because you can get dried dates as well.
I think a sultana is just a sort of date.
I don't know, they're too tiny. I thought it was just a different type of grape or something. Maybe it was like one was like a red grape and the other was like a white grape. Anyway, doesn't matter.
This is our new show. Like, this is the direction we're going. We're all going to quit our jobs and we're going to talk about delicious foods.
We're talking about the Amazons.
We are. And
not
this
the Reading
is going
rock
to be basically, okay, when you were in grade school and you and your friends wanted to see a movie, but it was like rated R, or I don't know if you guys have that system here, but you weren't allowed to go see it because there was nudity or like murders in it. And so the one kid who gets to see the movie comes to school and tells everybody what the movie is like and what happened. And that's basically probably what I'm going to sound like when I talk about Amazons.
So this is a book, just so we're
Yes.
cluing everyone up who's entering this conversation cold.
Yes. This is a book by a lady named Adrienne Maor, who is originally from South Dakota, and she is a historian, but she isn't trained as a historian. She's just a really great autodidact who trained herself, and she came into...
But she's a scholar, right?
She's a scholar, yes.
Universities.
She works at Stanford. But she doesn't have a degree in history. She's self-taught. And, you know, I actually interviewed her a while ago, and I asked her, I was like, okay, so how long did it take you to learn Greek and Latin? And she's like, I don't know Greek or Latin. And I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck? How did you manage to do all of this deciphering and, you know, all of this legwork to figure out what these things meant? She's like, well, I found the right people, and I came in with the outside ideas that weren't, you know, made inside academia. So I wasn't using the academic formula to figure out how to ask the right question. Right. She's like, I just had questions. She said, I was looking where things seem to be missing. It's like, okay, no women in history. This seems pretty weird. Also, you know, Amazons. What's the deal with Amazons? What how come they're supposedly mythical?
Right, so maybe let's start there. The book's called The Amazons, and it's about brave and...
It's about
strong women in
female
history.
warrior cultures from across Asia, India, and Africa.
Okay.
And she had written a book previous to that about, she had a theory that a lot of mythological creatures were probably based on what people in the ancient world thought were real, because they would find dinosaur bones.
Right.
For example, a cyclops skull could have been I think it was a stegosaurus. I don't remember what the exact thing was, like I said.
Yeah.
It was a dinosaur. So there's me as like the kid in like 5th grade going, I don't know what dinosaur was. It was dinosaur, and she knew it was a dinosaur. And then, so anyway.
So like sometimes when sailors think they've seen monsters, it's just whale penises.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
It's totally the
Yeah.
whale penis theory in effect. And she started doing a lot of research, and it turns out she was right. And I think she was obsessed with griffins and, the creatures with the beaks and the...
Kind of like is it a symbol of Gryffindor, or have I... I'm going Harry Potter on you, don't I?
Basically,
I think I know what you mean.
We could do a whole other podcast about how people talk about Harry Potter and Game of Thrones like they were actual periods in history. Like, I swear to God, more than once I've heard people say, like, well, back in Game of Thrones times, they would have, like, seriously, how many times have you heard people say that?
Yeah, quite often.
Back in Game of Thrones times, they wouldn't have had a laser. I don't know, whatever, but, like, they wouldn't have had fucking dragons either, but... And it's totally fake, but I totally lost my thread.
Sorry, but are there instances in popular culture for people listening who can't quite get a handle on what we're talking about, where you might see these women depicted?
Yes, Greek pottery was one place that they saw Amazons depicted constantly, and they thought they were this mythological thing that Greeks had invented, kind of like comic book heroes, or these other characters kind of in the pantheon of their gods and heroes, and things related to, say, a Medusa or the Fates, or just another bunch of characters. And she started researching them, and she was looking at a lot of Greek pottery, and she noticed that there was often writing next to the Amazons, and she would ask the scholars, well, what does it say? And they would say, it's Greek, it's just gibberish, it doesn't actually make a word. And she started...
Did they not say it's all Greek to me?
Oh, are you a dad? That's like, oh my God, you're almost like a granddad with that joke. That was amazing. That's exactly what they said. No. And she said, well, is it possible that it's a language that isn't written or was written and is dead now, but could it have been phonetic? Turns out every single inscription that they thought was gibberish was a phonetic spelling in Greek of a name, either in like old Parthian, Scythian, Sarmatian, all kinds of languages. And every single one translated into a name that was a warrior's name, and would often reference the woman herself, like woman who leads the horses, or she who loves arrows, and it's just something that people were so deep inside, ancient Greeks academia, like they couldn't make the question because they couldn't see the whole picture.
Right. Yeah.
And so somebody coming from the outside, it's like the story of, the truck getting stuck underneath the Holland Tunnel, and they couldn't get it out, and they couldn't figure out how to get the truck out of the Holland Tunnel. And a little kid walks up and says, why don't you deflate the tires? And then they got the truck out of the Holland Tunnel. It's kind of like that.
Right.
So she started doing all this research and found that not only was that happening, but at the same time they were able to start doing DNA testing on skeletons. And they found out that about 30% of horse warrior cultures were made up of women. And this is something they never realized. They thought that all the people in these grave mounds and kurgans were men.
Yeah.
And it turns out that about 30% of them were women. And Amazons didn't mean, man-hater. Nobody ever cut their boobs off. None of that was true.
Was that a myth that people cut their boobs off?
Yeah, that they were so hardcore that they'd cut one of their breasts off, which never happened.
I mean, why would you do that?
Well, thank you. Why would they fucking do that? That'd be ridiculous. No.
A man came up with that theory.
It's like, it's just not hard to shoot an arrow with your boob in the way. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
If you can ride a fucking horse, you can, like, that's way harder than shooting an arrow.
If you can ride a horse with 2 balls, then you can shoot an arrow with 2 breasts.
Goddamn right. And they invented pants, for one thing. Trousers,
Did
sorry.
They actually?
Yes, they actually did.
Okay, well, yeah.
And the Greeks found them vile because they didn't wear the Greek style underpants skirt thing that they had going on. The diaper skirt, I always think of it as. And they were considered vile for doing that. They just thought it was so gross. Plus, you know, the Greeks, their women and children lived like slaves. Like, they weren't allowed to do anything without male permission or they weren't really allowed to leave the house or do stuff.
But I suppose that's people's idea of ye olde time of Game of Thrones, you know, where women were very submissive and were told what to do and were kind of kept in line.
That's what keeps me going on the show, is because they totally aren't like that. And then they're just evil, nasty bitches half the time too. It's like, well, of course, they have just the same avarice and greed as men do. You know, they can choose to be good or not be good or whatever.
I think when I was, I mean, obviously I haven't read the book because I'm terrible at doing research and also only found out about this podcast at the start of the weekend. But
maybe as long as we can get people excited about it.
Yeah. But
simply because they're like, that Neko lady is so stupid about what she's talking about. I have to see what she's actually talking about by reading this book. I gotta say, Adrienne makes it really easy to understand, and
it's fine. We have done podcasts on like kind of historical texts before, and this is generally the way that the conversation goes.
You should seriously call her up and get her to correct everything I say. She'll be like,
oh. She can do it on Twitter after she's really offended. But no, one of the reviews said that it was about there was a equality between the men and the women in terms of strength and prowess.
Yes.
And part of me is like, but obviously the physicality between men and women is...
It's the horse that is the equalizer.
Right.
Because the intelligence was always there.
Yeah.
The craftiness was always there. The shooting ability was always there. It's the horse that makes you strong enough.
Oh, so they were all on horseback.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And not everyone. Like, she talks about the Dahomey warrior culture in Africa. And I think they were like on foot, but they were legions of female warriors. Which is another like really interesting offshoot. Like, there's something from every part of the world that has been not understood and actively buried by a lot of more ancient cultures because, you know, they're heavily patriarchal. And so learning, like, I want every woman and man to read this book just because I always knew those people were there in my deep core. I just knew, like, no, we weren't just fucking passengers and slaves and baby havers. There's no fucking way that we were just like side saddling along. There's no way. So
right, yeah, like
learning that
equality,
these people, like, who wouldn't want to protect their family and their tribe and everything else, and who wouldn't love their people enough to ride out and go after them?
So were these tribes, they were comprised of men and women?
Exactly.
So it was that kind of equality?
Yeah. And so I think a lot of the Greek was translated incorrectly from being, like, I think at one point they thought Amazon was some sort of ancient Greek for man-hater, but it turns out it was more lives equally with men, or that's not the right translation, but Adrienne has the right translation in her book, which is really fascinating. And I don't know, there are so many really great things in the book that are very empowering to read. And just, it's a piece of the puzzle that has always been filled in by us and we always know it. It's just such a fucking gaslight. Like, well, I mean, I took art history for a really long time, for example. I took it for like 10 years. And I think women made up about 1% of the curriculum. And now you just go, no, No, it was just taken away from them, or other people took credit for it.
Yeah.
Or, other kinds of arts just aren't valued. And I mean, art is a shitty thing as the art world, quote unquote. It's just a shitty exclusive thing anyway.
It's quite subjective.
Yeah, and we shouldn't pay attention to that. Like, how there's almost like this weird white jealousy that happens. Like outsider artists, the whole concept of outsider artists, it always seems like they had to make a separate category because people just couldn't take that these artists were as moving and powerful and hadn't been trained, supposedly. It's just this creepy, I don't know, I think the art world is disgusting, so I'm like, ugh.
But then, do you think that applies to the kind of scholarly world as well? And
Absolutely.
that's why these things haven't been uncovered until recently, because there weren't people who were kind of decreeing what should be studied.
Exactly.
Well, there was no equality there.
Yeah, and sometimes it just happened accidentally. Like I was saying, like a scholar trained to be a scholar in those ways, to ask questions in a certain way. Of course, sometimes you get blindsided, or not blindsided, but you get in a groove, and when you have a method, it's hard to leave that method if that method's been working for you for a really long time.
And
like
also
there are so many things I don't realize all the time within my own profession.
Yeah.
And then somebody will point it out and I'll be like, holy fucking shit. Wow. Oh my God. Or I think,
does she touch on this in the book? Does she say like, well,
yes,
the majority of the professors that have trained all these pupils have been male for so long that only now are there women coming through that are of the same? Yeah,
and a lot of the women's work there's a lot of Russian archaeologists who are women who are doing a lot of studies out, on the flats and stuff, like finding these Kurgan mounds in the middle of nowhere, and all these places that were like roots between like the Xiongnu tribe of China and Mongolia, who would come in and they, influenced the Huns, who were through, like, it's just such a huge swath of land.
And so it was always just, they kind of just assumed that these tribes were all male before.
Yep.
And now and maybe they also assumed that the women just did the baby carrying and food making.
Oh God, just wearing the skins and like poking the fire and doing the baby carrying. Yeah.
Right, okay. And now they're like, oh shit, actually they like fucking
and
kill
the same
people.
with Viking warriors too.
Right.
It's like, oh, they weren't all men. Right.
Right.
In fact, I think like a much larger percentage of the world populations were way more egalitarian. It's just that when in Western culture, we kind of base everything on Greek and Roman. And the Greeks, at some point in their culture, decided that women were not going to be powerful and they needed to be, servants, essentially. And there's a book called The Chalice and the Blade by Rhian Eisler, where she talks about the demotion of Athena from being in the pantheon of gods to just being a mere mortal. And she cites this as one of the big cruxes in Western history where things start turning in the favor of the patriarchy and rights start being taken away from the women. And a similar thing happened in Egypt as well, where there used to be a balance of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, and they were actually a matriarchal society way in the pre-dynastic. And then when the cults of Amun started coming in, which are around the times of like Ramses, etc., these priests were pretty crooked.
Right.
And that's why in the Amarna period of art in Egypt, things were happening that were really interesting and different, and there were a lot more women in that particular scene. And there were Egyptian pharaohs who were women who were buried in history, like Hatshepsut was buried. And it's like this weird descent that starts happening where the balance is completely thrown off. And one of the great high civilizations of Western culture was in Crete, in Knossos. The Minoan culture was totally men and women, and it was one of the last holdouts of places where people lived a lot more equally.
So around what date was that?
I don't remember.
Right.
But it would be pre the downfall of Athena and the eyes of the Greek people.
Okay.
But don't quote me on that.
I don't even know what a ballpark number for that is. 800
Well,
AD?
it's all BC.
It's all BC?
Way BC.
Oh, wow,
yeah.
so we're talking like a long
fucking time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been pretty shit ever since.
Okay.
But
you know, when you think of those like Egyptian murals and stuff that they find, is it just that the women weren't in them in these sort of powerful kind of modes, or is it that
women are in there
misinterpreted?
as goddesses and etc. But like I think Hatshepsut, her son or stepson, I can't remember, he became pharaoh after her and hated her for some reason and chipped off all of her monuments and tried to like totally destroy her legacy by erasing her from history. And the same thing with the Amarna period, with King Akhenaten and Nefertiti. You know, it's like the most famous image in Egyptian art, probably besides Tutankhamun, who was their kid. And there's a whole fascinating history behind that too. But I don't know, a lot of scholars say we're not looking at history correctly, and that's why we can't figure out what the fuck happened, because we're looking at it from a completely patriarchal place, where we just don't even imagine that women were rulers or influencers or makers or there as anything other than like these baby child fuck toys. I don't know what.
And
that's what I say when I'm
Does
mad.
it hint on? Does the book talk about religion at all?
In the Adrienne Maor book?
Yeah.
Yeah, she talks a lot about that kind of stuff, like what people did.
Because we're talking like BC, when it was more sort of pagan, I suppose.
Yeah.
And more mythological.
Yeah, I think people worship nature a lot, and they definitely were very reverent to the natural world. Horses, I don't know if they worshipped horses or not, but they definitely used them for every single thing. Milk, meat, transportation, it was their great equalizer.
When you think of like the kind of bigger religions, there's kind of like one god sort of religions, and that maybe their introduction, they all seem like very patriarchal. You know, like Christianity, and thinking about the Bible and the representation of women in the Bible, it does actually feel like
it's a real fucking bummer.
Yeah.
It's a real fucking
I just wonder
cheat.
whether she mentioned it. Does it talk about anything like around that time? Maybe there was a shift in society.
I think it's also pre-Christian, pre-Islam.
Yeah. And Judaism.
Judaism is really old, so there might be a little bit in there, because there's definitely, in that part of the world, there was definitely horse warrior cultures that had women in that area as well.
Yeah. How does the book, is it a kind of chronological, or does it go via areas?
I think it kind of goes topic, like, okay, here are some stories of mythologies. Here, now we're going to go like area, and then chronology.
Wow. So what's the most fascinating part of the book? What's the thing that really like made you go, oh shit, wow. I was not expecting that.
All the inventions, they are, you know, attributed to these women, like pants. That's a basic one, but my favorite. If there was a god, I would thank them for pants every fucking day.
It's kind of funny as well how we're always like, oh, who wears the trousers? And it's like, us, because we fucking invented them.
That's right. The use of marijuana as a medicinal plant, certain kinds of metallurgy to make swords and arrows, etc., axes tougher, the martial arts of Asia, all kinds of stuff, really big things.
Right.
That you're like, really? And it makes you feel so fucking good.
If this happened, it's 2018 now, so you're talking over 2,000 years ago.
Well, luckily, in Asia, the Chinese documented the shit out of stuff.
Really?
And so that is really inspiring, and there's a lot of, I don't know exactly. I don't remember how. I think I was so high on the information. Like, I definitely need to go back and read it a few more times. She also wrote a book about King Mithridates, who was this king from Pontus who just bothered the fuck out of Rome for a long time and did some pretty amazing things. So I'm rereading that book right now. But
She's 2 books she's done, or
she's written a bunch.
Really?
But the Amazons and the book about King Mithridates, which actually does tie in with the Amazons.
Does this area of history really fascinate you then?
Yeah, like definitely,
you're throwing
like
out a lot of names that I've never heard before.
Well, that's because they don't exist anymore, and I have a really hard time like teaching myself the geography of things east of Greece, up into the Ukrainian steppes, the Black Sea, into the Balkans, down into Syria. Westeros, thank you. The Narrow Sea, like I don't know I forget what's on the other side of the Narrow Sea. Like, what year did they found Hogwarts? I don't remember, I just don't remember.
No, I'm sorry, I'm just joking. It's just like, it's a lot to take in when you're like...
It is a lot to take in, and I'm getting it backwards, a lot of it.
Warrior women, and you're like, oh my God, it was so long ago, and then there were all these different tribes.
And it was no big deal.
It was no big deal.
We just got to take it for granted.
Yeah. It's so cool.
It's really cool.
And what does it go into, like, sort of how the family setup was, and like how they shared the duties of like not just fighting, like day-to-day kind of who does the housework.
Absolutely. And their relationships with men, their relationships with women, and how it wasn't like a mad, bloodthirsty lesbian society from the Isle of Lesbos that would eat men, like they would talk about, like there was a myth that the Greeks had about how they would kill all the male children.
Wow.
And there's absolutely who the fuck would do that? You know what I mean?
Well,
like,
I mean,
no.
flip it and you have an answer.
Yeah, never mind.
Unfortunately.
You're right.
Yeah, and that's what, not that long ago, probably still happens actually.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You're right.
But what was their kind of family setup like? How did they kind of share out duties? Like how egalitarian was it?
It was. I don't know. Like, you're a semi-nomadic people or a fully nomadic people. You gotta take care of each other. Like, I can't really.
It doesn't.
If you have a horse. You don't have to be as strong as a man to fight a man. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you are an expert shot, and especially if you've come along in a period of time where the Scythian bow, the recurve bow, has been invented, like the physics of the recurve bow make it possible to shoot like 2/3 farther. Like you're just basically this killing machine.
So is it most of the focus of the book's mostly on the actual fighting and these women as warriors?
There's a lot about the fighting, a lot about the warriorship.
Yeah.
There's, some talk of some regiments who were just women and just men who were part of the same tribes why they did that, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Probably psychological in some ways, or maybe they figured the ladies would better, I don't know. But they didn't want to just suddenly start having sex in the middle of a battle, so they better just separate them. Because obviously none of us can control ourselves, especially on horseback. It's very sexy up there. Yeah. And
does it talk about sex a lot in the book?
Yeah.
And what were the kind of like what like the kind of prejudices or was it any
I think
what's the word?
I don't think there was any like social mores or prejudices.
Yeah.
It was like your own moral compass. You do what seems right. If people would get together and part. If it didn't work out, or sometimes people would live in groups and go meet up with certain groups that had, I don't know, the opposite sex in there or the same sex, depending on how you were feeling.
Open and fine with that.
Yep.
Oh, what a world.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, the whole looting and killing from other civilizations isn't very cool. But I get, it's kind of one of those things at the time, like, we don't like that. But they would have been like, why would the women just sit around and hold babies and like poke the cooking fire? Why the fuck would they do that? You know, they wouldn't do that.
And does it talk about like their training and what would any more kind of? I feel like we need to get people.
I'm so excited about the details of everybody. Like, I'm just.
Oh my God,
oh my God, I can barely tell you about it because I'm so excited. It's just like how you'd probably ride from the time that you were 4. People would tie children onto horses and they'd learn how to ride that way, like just learn the body movements of a horse. And, you know, if you start riding at that young of an age, your bones actually form differently. That's why you see like the cowboy walk where people's bow-legged, you know, that's a thing that can happen if you ride horses for most of your life. Like your bones just turn outward.
Wow.
And they would have a very heightened sense of the natural world around them because they would live in it. Their instincts would be a lot sharper. They would be taught to hunt and shoot a bow from very young, or, you know, people chose whatever weapon really worked best for them. Some people, you know, would use an axe. Some people would use a sword, and some people didn't fight at all. You know, it's like, if they didn't feel they were right for the job, they'd be doing a different job. You know what I mean? Like some people eat meat, but they weren't meant to be a butcher. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't make sense. If it was, people were not drafted, but I think everyone was taught to fight should it come to that. And then, you know, different societies did things differently.
And what happens if you've got a group of these female warriors on horseback and they come across a group of male warriors on horseback? Does it go into those sorts of details? Because I mean, then surely
they were like, why don't we go do that together? Why the fuck do we want to stay here and fight each other when we could just go do some cool stuff over there?
Oh, but even if they were from a different tribe? Was it they would only fight women?
No.
Okay, I'm confused.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
Oh, no, I meant like, you know, you could meet up with people and...
Yeah, but if, I mean,
so you're asking...
Physically, men are stronger than women. That's just...
Unless they're on horseback.
But what if the men are also on horseback?
Then you're going to be fighting with swords and arrows, and who's a better shot?
Right,
at that point. It's about riding and shooting, which there's no difference.
Oh, wow.
Between men and women in riding and shooting.
Okay. So it was properly equal.
Cool.
And how long does the chronology kind of go from? Is it like over the course of how many hundreds of years?
Probably a couple thousand.
Really? A couple of thousand of years. And then,
I mean, there are still...
I'm just wondering whether, because I mean, that culture is no longer egalitarian, right? It's
no,
very
but there are
patriarchal.
still cultures of people that are horse cultures that hunt with arrows and hunt with eagles as well. There's a movie that came out a couple years ago called Eagle Hunter, about a young girl who traditionally does the traditional hunting, riding her horse and has her eagle go after things. And a lot of people were really bummed out because they kind of presented the movie like it goes against all odds. She's the first female eagle hunter in this sexist culture. And it's like, no, there's been female eagle hunters for thousands of fucking years. Like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, it doesn't have to be like some breakthrough story. Like, it's already fucking interesting enough. It doesn't have to be an overcoming the gender gap when she's just already fucking awesome, you know? So.
Right, okay. So, but I just wonder what the shift was that kind of meant that the kind of what was originally equal suddenly became so kind of male-dominated. Does it go into any details? Did the tribes just die out? Did Western culture take over certain areas? Or
well, I think some places, you know, are still remote enough and still rely on their horses even now in Asia. And I don't know, the modern world couldn't be bothered to give a shit or just thought it was cute and hokey. I don't know. In Western culture, we made sure of that. Like, but, you know, I think in Native American societies, it wasn't like that. I think women rode horses, and I mean, Native American women will tell you this. And there are warrior cultures still. And it's a fucking awesome thing, but I don't know, if white people didn't discover it and it's not quaint somehow, then it doesn't exist. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's still strands of this alive today.
Yeah,
for the most part. And what does it detail kind of how this sort of way of life faded? Is it just that people became more like modernity struck, or it's like? Well,
I'm sure the Industrial Revolution has everything to do with it.
Right. Okay.
Christianity was a real fucking takeout at the knee.
So
for women.
You think there was a little bit of like the kind of introduction
Christianity,
of
Judaism, Islam, real fucking lady killers, all three of those. Seriously.
Yeah, that's what I kind of meant earlier. Yeah, do you think that, because when you said it was kind of BC, I just wondered whether that sort of that period where religion maybe became more formal or formalized or written down in books, or I'm not
definitely
great knowledge on this area, by the way.
I think when those religions got big enough to really start monetizing everything and really controlling, like the turn of the priests of Amun in the Egyptian religion. I remember seeing a lecture by a lady who's a Egyptologist, and she's like, she went into it really deeply, and she pointed out, this right here is where Egypt was lost, right here, right to the point where these Amun priests were doing things like they didn't believe in the afterlife anymore, and they would just do really cynical things like shoving all the mummies in one hole and getting people to pay to make sure that these priests got them into the afterlife. They would start taking money for it instead of the people having to live a righteous life and to try to think of other people. It was monetized. And every religion has done that. And women are fucking annoying. We need to be cleaning stuff.
And for you yourself, where did your fascination with this begin?
I was having a really hard time. I had a stalker, and I had to do some really, really humiliating things. I had to spend my life savings dealing with this person, and he was just some fucking white dude who's obviously mentally ill, but my own, like, it's one thing to say that your country doesn't give a shit about you, and you know it, and you kind of say it like you want to say it before you realize it, because it's so much worse if you can say it first before it happens. It's almost like making fun of yourself before somebody else can do it. It's like realizing your own sort of worthlessness in the eyes of your country. And then you go and you fucking pay the judge and have them do fucking humiliating shit to you. And I became really so angry, like I couldn't sleep. I was so hypervigilant, and like the PTSD of the whole thing, like, I would sometimes hallucinate things and be really angry. And one day I was like, I have to find out when in the history of the world we started hating women, and when we decided that women needed to be a lesser species than men. And I just started doing a lot of research, and I read The Chalice and the Blade by Rhian Eisler, which was really helpful. But Adrienne's book actually was really uplifting. And I felt so much hope, and I was like, oh my God, all these young people, men, women, genderless people, are going to go forth, and they're going to find the history that has been chopped up and thrown away all these years, because it can be done. Like, the only reason we know about the Amarna period in Egypt, for example, is because the person who broke all of the tablets and chipped off all the monuments used those chips to fill like other walls that they made palaces and temples out of, And archaeologists came along and like found these pieces and put them all back together again. It's like, I hope that like there's a whole new wave of archaeologists and historians and writers who go back and find everybody's history, even if it's not complete. Like, it's such a big deal.
And do you think that what is happening in archaeology and this sort of history with another wave, or like a new wave of female professors and historians coming through, like professionals, people, scholars, people who have studied and who are coming at it with these fresh eyes, with these female eyes? Do you think that will apply across maybe other areas of
I think it's absolutely
science
happening.
And technology and like medicine, literature?
I think it's absolutely happening. It's just starting to take off, and I'm excited because it's like, it's not just like women for women, it's women for men and men for women.
Yeah.
And like, I think about all of like the lesbian, gay, queer, trans culture that has been buried.
Yeah.
Like in places where people were fucking revered, you know? Think about getting all that back. And like, it's like there's this weird puzzle piece inside your self-esteem that just fuses back together. And it just makes this complete machine. And you just feel this validation. And like, it takes some of the grease of the fucking gaslighting off. And it's really powerful. Now I'm crying. Now I'm crying on the podcast.
Sorry.
It's okay, I'm American. I'll cry in front of anyone.
I thought that was a beautiful place to end.
No, I'm crying. You gotta read Adrienne's book because now I'm crying.
A big thanks to Neko for that moving conversation. If you want to listen to more Talk the Lines with strong and brilliant women, check out our episodes with Amanda Palmer, Nadine Shah, Anne-Marie and Tracy Thorne at talktheline.blog. Next week, I am talking to We Are Scientists on Lee Child's Jack Reacher books. You have been listening to Talk the Line. I'm Jen Long. This is a podcast from the line of Best Fit, produced by Paul Bridgewater with original music by Seams. If you like this podcast, please do subscribe to it, follow us online, or if you're feeling very generous,